What did you make of the shopping list that President Zelensky put forward to the G7 leaders?
Well, I think it's exactly as one would expect. Just going back to the attack on the supermarket, first of all, what is dreadful is nobody's surprised about this. A lot of people like myself and others predicting that Russia will try, in the run-up to the G7 and NATO, create events that will make perhaps the G7 and also NATO think whether they should really be involved in this conflict. You know, this was a target of no military or strategic importance in the middle of Ukraine. And does Putin really think by killing masses of civilians that we in the UK are going to capitulate and leave the Ukrainians to their fate? Absolutely ridiculous. Rather sadly, it's out of the Russian playbook. And I saw the Russians a lot in Syria. They seem to have no compunction about collateral damage, and they seem to think by attacking and killing civilians, that is the way to resolve wars, because I think in their deluded minds, if the civilians capitulate and force Zelensky to act for peace with Putin, then that's the best way out. I mean, but as we've seen, that has the absolute opposite effect. So going back to your question, what we in NATO must do is provide the Ukrainians with the wherewithal to hold the Russians and push them back so that we can get them to the negotiation table, that's the Russians, to try and find some sort of peace. But what really concerns, I think, everybody is if you're prepared to murder thousands of innocent civilians, what are you not prepared to do? NATO today must make it absolutely clear that any escalation by the Russians will face an equal and larger retaliation from Ukraine and by NATO.
Well, absolutely, because as you say, it is from the playbook, and in many ways it's just testing the mettle of the response from the West, and President Putin really just saying, how far can I push this? A lot of people would say, look, you say it's absolutely essential that we fund, that we resource Ukraine in order to stand up to this Russian aggression. There's lots of rhetoric around supporting that, but is there the financial wherewithal? I mean, there's all this talk about this being the 1937 moment for us here in the UK, all this talk about whether or not we're going to meet our NATO commitments due to inflation. There's a huge cost of living crisis. There's a lot of pressure on the Treasury at the moment. Are we able to put our money where our mouth is, literally?
Well, that's a great question, and I know a lot of people in this country are really concerned about it. And one doesn't want to give a glib answer, but I do think we're at a 1937 time. And basically in 1937, we didn't rearm, we didn't make it absolutely clear to the Nazis that an invasion of Europe would lead to conflict in Europe. And that's why we need to make it clear. And you reported earlier that General Patrick Sanders is talking today and spoke yesterday that the British military must rethink and re-equip and retrain so that it can defeat the Russians on the ground. Because for the last 20 years, we've been fighting counterinsurgency against Al-Qaeda and against ISIS. But the Russians produce a very different threat, which at the moment we're not really configured to. But when it comes to your question, can we afford to do it? We can afford not to do it. Quite frankly, if we fail in Ukraine and this becomes a wider conflict in Europe, the cost of living crisis and the other dreadful things that people in this country are going to have to face will be of secondary importance. So in this particular case, I do agree with the government that we actually have to put all our resources behind this, money, our expertise, our training, and bolster Europe with our troops to make sure that this conflict is contained and we get a peace as soon as practically possible. And as Zelensky says, this war really needs to be over by the winter. If it drags on through the winter, one can see escalation and it's spreading wider than Ukraine at the moment.